What's the last thing someone said to you before they died? Don't stop riding. My dad, brother and I were heavily into mountain biking. My dad found a group through his work that rode their bicycles in a group on the weekend. I was a teenager at the time, but I became friends with an older lady named Joyce. On a road ride one morning, all the slower people, me, my dad, Joyce and a few others, were drafting off each other. When it was my turn, I accidentally clipped Joyce's handlebar and she went down hard. Now it was a nasty fall, but it wasn't bad enough to cause anything serious. Her protective gear should have saved her, but she was down. She was in a lot of pain and couldn't move without crying. We ended up having to call an ambulance. 14-year-old me was distraught that I hurt her so bad. A week or two later we get a call. Joyce had advanced stage cancer and the unexplained extreme pain from the fall was related to it, and that was how the doctors discovered it. I'll cut this short, the meds didn't work, and she was told she had less than 6 months. When it was our turn to visit her, she let me know that she doesn't blame me for what happened, and that I shouldn't let this stop me from riding. Don't stop riding. Your accident may have been a blessing. Not everyone has a chance to say goodbye, she did. Hey, want to finish the Diablo 2 run when I get back? One of my buddies. We were in Iraq. Dude. I'm sorry for your loss. Come here. My granddad wanting to tell me something before I went to work. I said I'll see you when I finished. He died while I was at work. Kills me inside knowing he wanted to tell me something before he died. Great. Now it kills me inside too knowing some stranger, possibly on the other side of the globe, is being killed on the inside knowing his granddad wanted to tell him something before he died. Thanks a lot. I am that type of person who dies on the inside knowing that someone is dying on the inside. My father was mostly non-verbal and not lucid while declining from cancer. I was sitting bedside when he suddenly woke up and started getting out of bed. Where are you going, Dad? I asked. He looked at me, his eyes twinkling above a huge smile, and said, I'm going to get some ice cream, boy. Edit. There was no way he could support himself at that point, so I got him back in bed, then ran to get ice cream. He was lapsing back when I returned, but he did have some ice cream. I'm pretty sure those were his last words to the world. While this is unbelievably sad, I couldn't help but smile, knowing that the last thing he did before he passed away was have some delicious ice cream. Cancer is awful. It has taken a few of my loved ones too. I'm sorry you had to go through that, it's really rough. I hope you're doing okay. My mom fell into a coma about a week before she died from lung cancer. Don't smoke. But the last time I saw her conscious, she called me by my childhood nickname and said she loved me and was proud of me. In terms of a parent's last words, it was the best thing she could have said. I still tear up when I think of it, 10 years later. The last thing my dad said to me was, my sister is taking me to the hospital, I'm not feeling well. Tell your daughter I said I love her too and I will see you guys soon. He went into surgery and never woke up. Died 4 days later. My grandma calling me by my Indian name and telling me she loves me. She died a week later from ALS. Oh fuck, not again. Seriously. A patient during med school said this. I'll never forget. It was probably them just pissed they were having a third heart attack, but I always wondered if they were some immortal being that had died before and managed to come back somehow. Hey man. Happy New Year. We still don't know what it is for sure. Probably leukemia or lymphoma. I will probably be here for another month or so, but can't say for sure. Take care of your health. This is the most pain and the most fucked up I've ever been in my life. Be well, good friend. I look forward to smoking a joint with you and telling the tale of how I conquered cancer. A text message I received right before he went into a coma that he would never come out of. I feel you. I had a guy the first was friends with, but hadn't seen for a while, show up and work, and say, I've got Hodgkin's and about 6 weeks to live. Just didn't want you to wonder what happened to me, dude. He was part of an extended circle of friends from a bar, and nobody from the circle even remembers his name except me. The day before my grandfather slipped into his last sleep, my car broke down. He heard about it and gave me a lot of money when I visited him. The last thing he said to me, I wanted to see you smile for one last time. Oh my God. Just thinking about how in that moment money no longer had value to him, but seeing you happy was everything for a man in his final days made me tear up. Thank you. As usual. It's really about time I returned the favor. My older brother had told me this countless times before. He almost always said it when he left. I responded with the usual. He was strange in the prior conversation, but because he seemed in a better mood than normal. That last goodbye, the same as always promise that had just become a formality, just felt so normal. I had no idea he'd already resolved to take his own life. He was saying goodbye for good, and I didn't even notice. I'm sorry that has happened. But in very common thing with people whom have resolved to take their own life is them being more happy than usual, unusual joy. Sometimes they make gifts before the final day. I made him promise to myself once I realized that I'm suicidal that I will never make that resolve. I hope I could help you try to recognize the problem before someone close to you will set the date on their calendar. Alright, my name. I'll see you later on. Always good seeing you. Then he gave me a fist bump. He went into respiratory distress from aspiration pneumonia an hour later, was transferred to the ICU for intubation, sedation, and ventilation, then died 10 days later. He was my favorite patient too, and we knew him from his recurrent bowel obstructions which would bring him into the hospital every year. Still have his name in my phone because he was going to teach me how to golf. Greater than NTO the hospital every year. Still have his name in my phone because he was going to teach me how to golf. If you're ever in Sweden, I'll teach you how to play buddy. My aunt's last words that I heard from her were, "You've grown so much," as I was a little kid, about 5, and she hadn't seen me for a while. The sheer innocence and love in that phrase is what I associate with my aunt now, and she was amazing. It's one of my life's biggest regrets. Last time I ever talked to my mom I argued endlessly with her, for hours. Last time I ever talked to my dad, unrelated and a couple years later, was also an argument. I'm so sorry. My comment was very similar. The only thing that kind of helps with the guilt is thinking of all the good memories and knowing that regardless of the last words, there was a lot of love. Grandmother said, "Take good care of Missy." Missy was her beloved cat. Almost the same here. My grandmother was being escorted out by the ambulance workers, and the last thing she said to me was, "He needs 2 types of food." My grandpa, on the phone. I wish we could have met. He lived in New Zealand, I live in Australia. I had met him, many times. Tore me up inside that it had been so long since I'd visited him that he'd forgotten me. It's not you, I promise. When my grandpa was gradually getting worse dementia, my dad visited him 3 to 5 times a week and talked to him on the phone multiple times a day, usually the same conversation, because grandpa forgot. Even with that, every time dad saw him grandpa would, sometimes gently, sometimes not, chide him for never coming to see me. "You don't have to visit me every day, I'll leave hospital in 2 days anyway," my father said. I replied I'd still visit next day as I love him. In the end we both were right, sadly. He died 25 hours after that talk. So I visited his dead body next day, and he was transported out of hospital 2 days after we talked. I think this exchange will stick forever in my mind. I'm sorry. Hug. Saw my childhood best friend after a few months. We were both busy and walking opposite directions, and I told him I'd come over tomorrow to catch up and play some Xbox. Died in a car crash that night. He was 14, would be turning 20 this year if he made it. My aunt slowly declined over 2 days, but before she was mentally not there she told me she loved me, and we held each other and cried. Then my mom sang her favorite song to her. My dad. Stop shaking the fucking ladder. My grandfather is Chinese and doesn't know English well, and I used to get paid to feed him and watch him. I was the last person to see him alive. He waved me off because he didn't feel like eating and sat down in his chair and just kept telling me by waving to go. So I kissed his forehead and left. Then the next day I found out he died in that chair. A family friend said, "Hot day, isn't it?" He died few hours after due to heat stroke. Very sad but a little funny. Life's like that, I suppose. I hadn't seen my grandma in years as we live so far away. I went back to my hometown with my mum when we found out she was being transferred to palliative care. The last thing she said was, "I was waiting for you," when she saw me. My granddad told me, in jest, that I need to graduate much sooner so that I can become his personal doctor. He died a few months after that. I'm about a year from finishing medical school, and every time we have elderly male patients, I keep seeing him in them. This one's for you, Tatung. The last conversation I had with my dad was horrible. He'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and was near the end. He was on some very heavy painkillers and was hallucinating and had no idea what was going on anymore. For whatever reason, he thought I was there to take his money. Which is ironic, as out of all my siblings, I'm the only one who never asked my parents for money or help. He was genuinely afraid and kept asking me why I wanted to kill him and take his money. I know that it was the drugs, but in the moment, his fear and feelings were real to him. Still haunts me. Yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of when we found out, and I'm still struggling to be honest. It's easy to remember the date, as it was the day he stopped crossing days off his calendar, which always makes me think of the preciousness of time and how we don't really value it until there's an end in sight. Fuck cancer. My grandpa had lung cancer that had metastasized throughout most of his body and his brain before it was found. So for last month or so, he was in and out of lucidity and nearer the end pretty much out of it, didn't recognize anyone really. My brother and dad hadn't been speaking for a couple of months over some stupid unrelated bullshit, so he had been avoiding the family other than my sister and I finally convinced him to come with me to see our grandpa, flat out told him he wasn't gonna be around much longer and he'd regret it if he didn't put his issues aside to see him at least once. They were close. We get there and my grandpa recognized him at first and had a huge smile. He was more lucid than he had been for a couple of weeks. Previous week he didn't know who I was when I was leaving and giving him a hug. In the middle of the hug he jerked away from me and looked at me like I was some weird stranger. They had a good talk, and as we were leaving, he asked us if we needed gas money to get home. We told him no, we're fine. He died a few days later. But I'll always remember that even gone as he was, near the end, he still cared for us and wanted to make sure we were okay. That the last thing he said was looking out for us. The last conversation I remember having with my grandpa before he died, he asked me if I was still playing guitar, and I said I was. The last words I heard from 3 of my grandparents were the exact same. Goodbye. Come back soon. My Nana, I love you. Man, I miss her sometimes. That hits hard. That's the last thing my grandmother said to me when I called her to wish her a happy birthday last April. She died at the end of April 2020. Fuck COVID. Man. I can't bring myself to read the exact conversation, but I was arguing with my cousin about a comment she made in regards to being anti-LGBTQ. My brother is trans, and him and I are both bisexual. We took her words to heart and brought that up to her via Messenger. It was a long argument that ended in us refusing to see or speak to each other until the other educated themselves. She and her oldest child were murdered a few months after that. Those were the last things I ever said to her. It haunts me. Don't let it haunt you. I know. Easier said than done. He needed a blood transfusion fast to save his life and I kept on asking him to tell me what blood type he was, but he seemed resigned to his fate and just told me to be positive. I had a friend who with their dying breaths gave me their most valued possession to remember them by. I'll never understand why that EpiPen was so special to him, but I will cherish it forever. It hurts. That's what my grandma told me when I last visited her in her senior's home 3 years ago. She didn't recognize me and was basically mumbling nonsense things, but I remember this sentence clearly. I was thinking she was having one of her worst moments. She used to be lucid on some days and on other days she didn't recognize anyone and was just babbling. Anyway, I didn't know what to do. I really didn't believe my grandma was in pain, so I went home and called my mother, who then called her sister, my aunt, who checked on my grandma. Grandma had inner bleeding due to bad medication. Her doctor had given too much blood thinning medicine, and must have been suffering for days. She died 2 days later, stuffed with morphine. I still blame myself for it.
Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.